Welcome, everyone. I am Sherry Reichert-Ballou, and I'm author of Say It Now, 33 Creative Ways to Say I Love You to the Most Important People in Your Life. And I'm really excited today to have Michelle Travis and Dr. John Duffy here. And we've got two great parenting experts. So we're going to be talking about parenting during the pandemic, and both from the side of taking care of yourself, but also taking care of your children, obviously. So welcome. Oh, hi, Marlena. Good to see you. Nice that you're here. Yeah, so let's start out. Michelle, why don't we start with you? And if you would just, hold up your book and give us the title of your book so we know. And then also let us know, how have you been taking care of yourself during this time?
Thank you, Sherry. It's so nice to be here and sharing this really important conversation that we're all really struggling with. So my book is Dads for Daughters: How Fathers Can Give Their Daughters a Better, Brighter, Fairer Future. And the book is actually in many ways targeted for dedicated dads who really during this time have really, I think, in some ways, unique opportunities to be engaged in ways as caregivers that they haven't before. So that's actually one of the sort of upsides to the challenges. So we can talk about that. For me, the way that I'm really trying to take care of myself with two daughters who are 12 and 14 right now is largely living more in the moment, engaging in the moment, trying not to think too far behind or too far ahead in many ways, because there's a lot of anxieties that we share about the world and about my daughter's future that I can't control. So knowing what I can control and what I can't, and paying attention to the things I can control in this moment at this time. I think the second thing that I'm trying to work on is also just cutting myself some slack, knowing that we don't have to be perfect to be doing a great job with our kids. And our job and all of the other things we're juggling, and that being present is more important than being perfect. And knowing that this is a difficult time to be at our best, and that's okay. And then the last thing that I'm trying to do personally is to make time for exercise, which for me is my particular outlet and stress reducer. It's different for everyone, but to find where that is. And sometimes I find myself feeling personal guilt for taking moments to do the thing that helps me with my own mental health. But I find that the payoff for my ability to be an engaged parent is definitely worth the time that I take to do that. So finding whatever that way is to sort of help my own, your own individual mental health, really to think about that as actually something that you're doing to improve your parenting. For me, that helps me. So it's a day-to-day process, and I'm really looking forward to hear everyone else's strategies during this uniquely challenging time.
Yeah. Oh, Michelle, I really appreciate those things that you said. So important. Being present, huge. I love that. But I really also love that you right away, just started with, you don't have to be perfect, cut ourselves some slack. I think, gosh, as parents, we always need to hear that, but especially now, like there's so much pressure, I think, that people are feeling. So thank you for that. And then I love too that you brought in self-care. Such another important aspect, that by doing that, and especially exercise that you mentioned, how that fuels us to give us more energy and presence. So really beautiful tips. Thank you. Love it. Dr. John, hello.
Hi.
How about you?
Yeah, so I actually agree with a lot of what Michelle had to say. So I'm the author of this book, Parenting the New Teen in the Age of Anxiety. I'm a clinician, so I'm a therapist, and I work with teens and tweens and parents. I am married. I'm the father of one child who is now not such a child anymore. He is 24 years old. But I work with dozens of young people, and that oddly is part of my self-care. So I've been doing Zoom meetings this entire time and connecting with young people and their intelligence and their humor and their hope. That actually has gotten me through an awful lot of what has been happening over the course of the last several months, because there's this perspective that young people have and this tenacity on their worst days that I like to draft off of and take something away for myself from. In terms of taking care of myself outside the office, and I do not spend enough time outside of here, like Michelle, I need to exercise virtually every day to find some degree of regulation there. I think most of us do, and I encourage my clients to do that. I think that's a great way to inoculate yourself from some of the anxiety, the fear, the depression that we're all going through. And I've been fortunate enough to quarantine with my wife and my son and his girlfriend, and they're all very good humored people. So we have laughed a lot, and not always in the most reverent way, but that's helped us get through an awful lot of these difficult times as well. So between exercise, humor, and stealing some time away from myself, I feel like I've kept my wits about me, at least thus far.
Oh, I love that. I love that you have so much humor in your household. What a joy. And I can tell, you bring such a lightheartedness that I'm sure that is such a great gift for the people in your household too. And it's interesting because just when you were talking about exercise too for you and that being a way to ward off depression, Nita just joined us. Hi, Nita, whose book is one of my very favorite titles, called Depression Hates a Moving Target. And so, I think that's perfect to bring in right now, how much exercise, both for parents themselves, but also as much as we can encourage our children and, children we work with. So thank you so much. And I love also, John, I love what you said about drafting off the energy of the young people you work with. That was beautiful. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and it's hard not to. It's that is easy. I mean, once you kind of submit to that, and that's what I encourage parents to do, is kind of allow themselves, instead of always fighting their parenting, right? And creating this war in the household, to kind of draft off of some of the energy of their kids and listen a little better. And you might find yourself as a parent a little less fearful.
I love that. Gosh. We're just a few minutes into this, and already I feel like we've gotten so many great, places to ground ourselves in this. Let's go back to you, Michelle, and let's talk specifically about maybe anything from your book that you feel would be really helpful for people right now.
Yeah, thank you. So Dads for Daughters is really part celebration, part guidebook, and part call to action. Specifically to fathers of daughters to really be fully engaged in the power that they have to raise empowered and confident girls for the future. And so the book shares stories about things that dads of daughters have done, both in their parenting and outside of the home, as a way to really not just empower their daughters to truly believe that they can be anything and do anything, but also to think about how their role can also advance and support gender equality in broader ways, to kind of use their parenting as a mechanism to kind of help create the world that they want their daughters to be entering. And so the book is also for us women who are engaged in this conversation. I think of it as also a way in which we can invite men into our conversations about parenting and open up parenting spaces so that they can be more of a co-equal partnership because of the powerful impact that dads can have in their daughter's life. So I think it's a great way to do that. I would say probably the one important takeaway that I think is maybe most important for all parents right now, dads and moms, is just the sheer power of modeling shared parenting, shared engaged parenting, modeling what it means to really be co-equal partners in this endeavor of the day-to-day, both joys and work of parenting. And by modeling that we're really partners in this endeavor, that is one of the most powerful ways, I think, not only to really empower your kids, but also to actually start advancing gender equality in really important ways, right? To be setting notions of gender roles and to be disrupting gender role stereotypes in the most important relationships that your children are going to have. So it plays this amazing dual role of both getting you engaged in the people that you care about most, but also this broader role, and know that that extra work that you're doing as partners, and having conversations about what it means to be a partner, having actual conversations about how do we divide up this work that seems like it has quadrupled in our new pandemic world, explicitly and with our kids, is an incredibly powerful way to serve both of those goals of wanting to sort of empower our kids, but also to really be advancing sort of goals of gender equity, which benefit our girls and our boys, right? So that's probably the biggest kind of general takeaway. Modeling that co-parenting and shared day-to-day goes so far for so many goals.
Michelle, do you feel like in your experience, do a lot of parents have these conversations? Like, I love what you're saying because it's so conscious and intentional.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think some do and some don't. And I will have to say that even as someone who, as a law professor, that has spent my life thinking about gender equality and thinking about, in particular, work-family integration is the source of my research as a law professor for 20 years, haven't really consciously had these conversations. And I'll admit that it's not something we naturally do. But one of the kind of, I think, opportunities that this global pandemic, which has brought so many incredible challenges. But one of the opportunities that is brought, and that I've seen trends as I'm talking to parents, is that they have used it as an opportunity, partly out of sheer survival necessity, to have these conscious conversations. So, for example, I recently talked to a couple who had both work full-time and are raising young kids, and things had sort of worked out because they had childcare and et cetera. But with childcare gone, and both of them running their full-time work from their home while trying to have the kids still having some school, something education, right? It became impossible not to have those conversations. And it made many of us, myself included, realize that why didn't we have these conversations before, right? So they had to plan out of necessity. Well, I get the one place in our house that has a locked door that can like actually close and lock and be quiet from 9 to 1. And you will have the kids from 9 to 1. You will get the office from 1 to 5. From 5 to 6, we're going to Zoom the grandparents in, and they're going, because we could probably have them, entertain the kids for an hour on Zoom. That would probably work. So 5 to 6, and then we have 6 to 7. It's going to be our, and obviously it's a fluid thing that you have to be flexible with because it changes day by day. But just having that conversation is so powerful, both for just allowing you to be kind of thoughtful and engaged parents, but as a modeling tool, right, for our kids. So I think this is probably something we should have all been doing all along, but I think it's an opportunity that we really can take and have it be sort of a way to make forward progress on the goals that we all share, right, as moms, as dads, as parents.
No, I love this. I so appreciate, what you're saying. First of all, the positivity about it, really seeing that what's really such a challenge as an opportunity is beautiful, but also this broader umbrella that you're looking at gender equality and that role modeling. I find that is such a positive piece of this too. What were you saying about that?
Yeah, I think it's a nice way also to remember the good and powerful impact that we're having as parents, even on the day-to-day moments when we are struggling and feeling like we're failing and couldn't help with the Zoom math problem and couldn't get the technology work, and so we missed the math class. Like all those moments, to know that simply being engaged as co-parents and being present is actually serving these larger goals that are going to empower our kids broadly in ways can help, I think, when we struggle, which we all do.
I love that. Thank you so much. It's really great. John, how about you? What would you like to share from your book?
Well, first, I would be remiss if I did not give a nod to Michelle's work. I've been kind of tracking your work, Michelle, and the whole idea that you just described about gender equity and modeling within the household, it feels so of the moment. Just briefly, I did my dissertation research about 20 years ago on balancing gender roles in terms of caretaking, in terms of household chores, and men in both situations were effectively non-existent, really in the margins. And And what I have found over the course of working with parents for the last 20 years is we guys might think we're getting away with something by not matching up with the amount of work that mom is doing, for example. But the truth is, and I think you're kind of highlighting that and hinting at that, that we're missing out on the joys of parenting. We're missing out on making an impact on our kids. We're missing out on the message of gender equity. So I like to think, and this is a little grandiose of me, that our work may be companion pieces in that. In parenting the new teen in the age of anxiety, what I focus on is the difference in parenting in the last, I say 10 years, but really it's been the last 4 or 5 years or so, that parenting teens and tweens has changed so dramatically. If you picture a teenager now, that child doesn't remember what it was like before they had all the information on planet Earth in the palm of their hands. They don't remember when a camera wasn't trained on them, when they weren't a subject of social media, right? I mean, they don't remember when they didn't have enormous academic pressures where from second grade, they were already looking toward high school and college. They didn't know, they don't know what it's like to be free of social media and all of the impact on self-worth and self-esteem that social media exerts. And we could go on and on and on about how different it is right now to parent kids and to be a teenager than it was just a few short years ago. Vaping and juuling and all of these new and broader stressors. And so it's more challenging as a parent as well when you add a pandemic on top of that, and endless hours of togetherness and having to figure out a way to homeschool. A friend of mine is on a school board nearby, and he said, in order to put together a reasonable shelter-in-place schooling situation for parents to run, it would take a good 7 to 10 years reasonably. But we had to do it in 2 weeks. So there's all these challenges that we face. And in a lot of the households that I work in, to your point, Michelle, there's one parent doing the vast majority of the parenting work, the heavy lifting. And if we could spread that out and make that more equitable, that alone will manage a lot of the challenges that I talk about. But the core idea that I'm trying to get to here is if parents maintain a strong connection with their child, and so many kids will tell me somewhere around the time I turned 12, 13, 14, mom and dad went from adoring me in every possible way to starting to look for the things I was doing wrong. And I felt like I'm being policed. And I feel like they're not allies, they're people to work around. And you ask any parent, none of us wants to be in the camp of being the enemy. We all want to be allies. So what I'm encouraging parents issues by issue to do is to maintain that place of being an ally and a guide and a consultant to your child and connect with them. And to my point earlier, to laugh with them, to understand their world and learn from them. And this is the first generation of parents that knows less about being a teenager than their parents did. So we have a lot to learn, a lot of questions to ask. Kids are good teachers, but we have to put our egos at bay in order to really learn from them.
Wow. Wow. Can you say a little bit more about how do you work with parents to do this? Like, I love what you're saying about that, you know, learning from our children and laughing with them and being more connected.
Yeah, absolutely. So families typically come into my office with a presenting problem. The grades are too low. We don't like the crowd he or she is hanging out with. We think there might be substance abuse involved in his or her life, whatever it is, right? I typically am not interested in focusing on that in the initial sessions. I am looking for the connections between mom, dad, and child, and modeling that to some extent, because for those of us who work with children of any age, it takes moments to recognize, oh, this is a unique, remarkable human being. And I really love being with them. And they can be at their worst. They can be the most difficult, troublemaking person, but you sit down with them for 5 minutes without judgment and you realize, oh yeah, you're really cool. I get it. I even get why you act the way you act. I understand. And if you can show mom and dad and remind them, oh yeah, this is still your child. This is still an amazing human being. There might be 50 things that need to change, but you have to remember that in order to make any impact on any of that, your connection with them is crucial. So where you might be spending 90% of your time lecturing at them about what they're doing wrong and what needs to change and why it's important to get good grades, if you could take that 90% and just join their world, sit down and listen to the rap music with them, watch the ridiculous cartoon with them, try to understand a little bit about what it is they're carrying around, what they're going through. The other 10% is easy. That stuff will either fall away easily or you'll have the traction with them because they know you care. They know you're in their camp. And way too many kids don't feel that idea that mom and dad, they're 100% with me in my camp.
Wow, that is so powerful. That is so powerful. And I'm thinking, especially now, right? Like when we're all like stuck together, we need to feel like we're allies and that we're in the same camp.
Yeah, because if we don't, you know, especially right now, as you're saying, the divisions can just get deeper, right? I'm going up to my room. I hate you, you know, well, go ahead. Who cares? You know, good riddance. And all of a sudden you have a deeper rift. And by the end of the pandemic, you might have something that almost feels irreparable. And that's what we're trying to avoid here.
Michelle, did you have some more that you wanted to add to this?
Yeah, John, thank you so much. And I will say, I pre-ordered John's book long before the pandemic because my daughters are 12 and 14, and I appreciate the wisdom in this book so much, both in my personal and professional life. So thank you. And it is so incredibly prescient in terms of its relevance now, right? When we layer on just this additional layer of stress and anxiety to the ones that are already there. John, I love your focus on being an ally and allyship. That's one of the kind of broad themes that I think about in all kinds of relationships, partner relationships, when we're thinking about relationships with colleagues, coworkers, in our family, outside of our family. And what does that mean to be an ally and to demonstrate, right? It's not just self-identifying as an ally. What does it mean to act and demonstrate and deeply play the role of an ally? And to think of parenting as allyship, I think is just a really, really powerful concept. So thank you for sharing that, because, you know, I've often thought, wow, in this sort of teen age, one of the things I'm trying to do is sort of shift from being a manager to, you use the term consultant, right? And how do you know, it's hard to give up managerial, right, and become a consultant. But the only way to do that, right, is to have them have enough trust in you to enable you to be, you can't be a consultant if they don't trust you and come to you to consult with. And do that really, requires the kind of connection that allows them to think of you as an ally. So I think this idea of allyship is really a really powerful one. And that's something that we build in small steps, small conversations, small moments, right? In small interactions, day-to-day interactions, where we can laugh with each other, as John said, or simply we listen instead of directing, right? Or we ask questions more than giving advice, which is a tough thing for many of us, myself included, to do, right? But I love that as a goal. How do we reach the idea of letting our kids know and actually truly being authentic allies? I think that's a phenomenal way to think about navigating both the day-to-day and the long-term challenges and, as I mentioned before, opportunities. So thank you for that concept. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah. Anything else coming up for you around that, John? we move through this?
Yeah, what I liked is, and we could probably do this for an hour, but you focused on the idea of moments, and this is something I think it's really hard to grasp as parents. So I typically have 55 or an hour-long sessions with families in my office, and I can sense that parents feel like, okay, I now have your undivided attention for an hour, and it's almost like they're taking a podium. Here comes my lecture. I haven't had the opportunity to take the hour to lecture at you. Instead of recognizing that kids today work in moments, they work in sound bites, they work in these little pieces. A text can be more important than a 20-minute lecture in terms of making an impact. So I love that idea, and I encourage parents, like, accept the moments that you get with your children. They're going to make an impact. The longer you're taking to try to make it, if you get 20 minutes in the car and your child is talking, take it, right? Absolutely lean back and take it. And if they're talking about their favorite music or whatever, absolutely take it. But if you get a moment here and there, do not shut that moment down. Absolutely take the time that you get and trust that they're living in a different world than you did when you were a teenager. A lot of us would say, boy, I want to see a little fear in my children of me. And my question to parents is always, do you really? Like, is that really the best story you can write? Like, a lot of us were afraid. I was afraid of my dad when I was a kid. And when I grew up and I realized he wasn't such a scary guy, that's when we started connecting. That's when I stopped avoiding him. So I often think, like, parents feel like we have to parent the way we were parented. But really, I think it's important to recognize our kids are different. They're not afraid. And that's a pretty good story, right? We have this opportunity to connect with them in a much deeper way because fear is not part of the factor. It certainly doesn't have to be. So we can be those allies that we're talking about. And we can connect in those really important ways. And why not do that? I always think in parenting about, like, what's the best story we can write? And to keep in mind the long game, that we're not just developing relationships for our 14-year-old or with our 18-year-old, but with our 30-year-old and our 40-year-old and their children. And so we want to set a tone in our family that is kind of long-standing and by and large positive, right? And accepting and open, right? If you've got something that's on your mind, I want you to know you can come to me with it. If you've got something funny, if you've got something that you think I ought to learn or attend to, let me know and let's work together on it.
That, John, I love so much. I love the contrast too, that it's like looking at moments, how important these moments with our children are. And I just had one right before. I was almost late for the panel because my son suddenly, when I went in the house to get water, he was there to talk, and I was like, grab those moments. But then also the long term, right? So it's like both. It's like the importance of those tiny moments with them, and then the importance of our long-term relationships. Yeah. And I wrote that down. What is the best story we can write? Love that. Yeah. Does anybody who's here, would you like to jump in? Do you have anything you'd like to ask or add to the conversation?
I have one thing to share and a question.
Okay.
I'm totally on board with you about the humor. Sarcasm is a tool I've used throughout raising my two daughters. But humor was really important once they got to their teen years because I borrowed from football. I borrowed the penalty flag. I found a piece of bright yellow cloth, and I put a little rubber band around it, one end to weight it, and we used it as our drama flag so that we could call out drama when there was too much, and just to diffuse the situation. And it worked beautifully because it was just this moment of, okay, we can look at ourselves and laugh now, for a moment, and then we can actually talk about what we're upset about. So it was really a good tool for diffusing in that moment. It was really fun. I think I should frame it someday. But my youngest is at the end of her teen years, and she's about to be a junior in college. And obviously her sophomore year, the end of it got very messed up by COVID. The school closed, it was all online classes. It's very uncertain for what's going to happen in the fall. Theoretically, they're going back. but it does create a lot of anxiety for her about, these are supposed to be the best years of my life. I don't know what it's going to look like. We can't have parties, we can't socialize, and I don't have an answer for that because I don't know what it's going to look like. And so navigating that disappointment in advance is very difficult, and it's creating a lot of anxiety for her. So I'm wondering if you have tips on how to negotiate that.
Yeah, I'll throw a thought in here. First of all, Lynda, I am going to absolutely steal your flag idea because that is going to be happening in my office within the week. So I appreciate that. That is brilliant. I love that. So fun and so funny, and no drama. I love that. In terms of your daughter's disappointment, this is pretty universal. So many kids, well, virtually all of them, right? This year has gone completely different than any of them have anticipated. And the vast majority are disappointed in many profound ways that are legitimate, right? So oftentimes I will work with kids where I'm trying to work through irrational fears, irrational disappointments. Now, a lot of what kids are upset about is actually quite rational and quite reasonable. And so what I find myself doing more often than not is joining them in grieving what is lost, because it's legitimate. Your daughter had lost the end of that sophomore year, and she pictured something completely different, a different rhythm, a different cadence, days and months where she was going to be with her friends and with the faculty all day long. And none of us has any idea what that's really like, So what I find myself making assumptions often when kids come to my office. I know what you're upset about. You're upset about COVID. You're upset about missing school. 99 times out of 100, I don't quite nail it. But when I ask and listen, then I get to understand, and every single child, teenager, tween-age child, and college student I've worked with has had something different on their minds in the midst of all of this chaos and awfulness and loss, including some kids who feel an odd sense of relief, like, ooh, some of my social anxiety is gone, or my fear of missing out. I'm not missing out on anything. There's nothing happening on Snapchat. So to really get down to talking to your child about, like, well, what has this been like for you? Without making an assumption that we know, you might learn something that you didn't otherwise know. But as parents, I think we're often inclined, because the last thing we want for our kiddos is for them to suffer. So our inclination is, I'm going to talk you out of this. I'm going to tell you that junior year is going to start awesome, and we are going to throw a big party sometime as soon as this is all over, which is great, but you don't want to get to that too quickly. Otherwise, you're effectively saying, I can't handle your pain. I can't really absorb all your pain, so I have to mitigate it somehow for myself. And so your child will go somewhere else with that pain, and I think you want her to come to you. So you can talk all you want about how much it hurts you too, how sad you are for her, but it's okay to sit in the sadness, because what she's probably looking for is somebody not to fix it, because she's smart. She has a smartphone, I'm guessing. She knows you can't fix the sadness. She knows you don't know what's going to happen at the beginning of next semester or in the middle of next semester, and that not much is certain in this world, right? She knows that you can't guarantee much of anything. But if she knows you're there as an ally and you're there to really listen to all of it, that goes a long, long way in terms of, okay, mom heard me, I'm good. And usually most kids can feel like, if I'm heard, I can move on. If I'm not, I'm stuck. I'm really stuck in the muck, and I've got to find somebody else. And far too often, they'll go to another child. They'll go to another person their age who they're always willing to help each other, which I think is amazing. But I went to grad school for a lifetime. I had to write a dissertation. I don't want 14-year-olds having to do this job. So I think if you listen and let it run its full course, you'll be doing your job as a parent.
Thank you very much.
Michelle,
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
thanks. Sorry, I jumped in. This is such an important question, I think, because for many of us as parents, the hardest part of the pandemic and the challenges of the pandemic is seeing the losses that our children are facing, right? For me, that is by far the hardest. Just seeing the things that they looked forward to that they don't have the opportunity to do. And so it's a struggle both of, you know, I'm dealing with my sadness for them, about them, right? And so how do I deal with it? And John, I love you're sort of encouraging not to jump too quickly to let's solve this solution, like let's set up our Zoom, whatever it might, you know, how do we fix this? Because they'll figure that out and get there when they need to. I've found, although I find it hard to do because it's not our natural inclination, right? As professionals who are used to solving problems, right? To grieve with my kids, to grieve for the lost. And I will say one of the particular challenges of this for me was that my children who are 12 and 14, and they suffered, you know, real losses. There was no real graduation from middle school, which is an important moment, the survival of middle school, right? It's something to celebrate and that loss. And but my children are so sort of perceptive and aware of the fact that no matter what the challenges and losses that we're feeling, we're actually in a quite privileged place relative to many other people that they know and don't know, right? That who are struggling even more than we are. We're healthy. We have a home over our head, even though we're crawling the walls, right? And they understood that and internalized that. And it took me a while to realize that they were holding in their feelings of loss because they felt a level of guilt in feeling sad about their losses because they knew that others had lost more. And that is deeply perceptive. But it made it difficult for me to fully understand what they were actually feeling and the grief that they were feeling because their perceptiveness made them feel cautious about sharing that because that made them feel indulgent, right? And I thought, wow, we need to acknowledge that. And also that it's okay to feel our own loss at the same time that we are having empathy for people who are having even greater losses than we are. And we can feel the sort of blessed nature of things that we have and still be okay with feeling that loss. And so just that sense of being able to grieve with them is, and then they are very, very adept at figuring out how to reconnect in ways that it would not have crossed my mind to do, in part because they are so far ahead of me on technology. But to get to that point where they really wanted to focus on that, I found dealing with those layers that I didn't initially perceive of or understand was took me a while.
Wow, so important. I just listened to a podcast by Brene Brown where she was talking about comparative suffering, which is exactly what you're saying, right? And that all of our pain, you know, should be grieved. We should allow ourselves that. And so I just so appreciate that you both brought that in right now. Very important. Wonder if there's other questions, or Becky, did you just unmute?
Sure. I think one of the things I'm struggling with the most, I have two kids and they're very, very different from each other. And trying to keep, I mean, social comparison is one thing you want to avoid anyway, but I think parenting long before the pandemic is always this balance between sort of supporting them and pushing them to help motivate them to get on to the next thing. And so it's interesting for me, my 20-year-old was a freshman in college and he's got plenty of things that he's doing. He's working on music projects and other things. And my 13-year-old wants to just chill out and watch episodes of The Arrow or various things. And it's hard to kind of find the right balance, I think, between just letting him chill and go, yeah, this sucks. And it's hard that you don't have as much of a plan, that your summer camp was canceled, et cetera. And so just kind of, I think mostly just reminding myself of love and limits and we're okay, we have it, but kind of getting that where I find myself tripping up the most is when I start to think, oh, well, you know, the older one is so motivated to do this kind of thing. How do I help with the motivation? And then realizing that that puts me on shakier ground, because it's the trying to fix something, trying to change something, as opposed to watching it emerge. So more of an observation than a question, but if you have thoughts on finding those levels of balance in parenting.
I'll throw a thought out. It is tricky. I think whenever you have more than one child and you've got siblings who have different levels of motivation, and you've got a pretty significant gap there, right? That, you know, what, pandemic or no pandemic, that is a difficult thing to navigate, and it's probably really difficult not to go to your 13-year-old and say, look what your older brother or sister is doing, you know, let's go. This is who we are as a family. This is on the family crest that we do things. And, you know, you are just hanging out, you're acting lazy, and your pandemic hangover is over, and we are going now. Now it is time to get going, right? And I totally get that. This is such an interesting time. I've always noticed that we as parents kind of judge ourselves, and we make our kids unwittingly, I think, part of our report card, right? We kind of feel like, this is a reflection on me somehow, and she's not where she needs to be. And boy, her brother, look at, he's making these music projects and he's engaged, and what we forget to do is kind of trust that our kids are in a process, right? So one thing I have the luxury of doing as a clinician is, you know, when parents come into me with what feels like a crisis in real time, typically I can think 2, 3, 5 years down the road and think like, what do I picture for this child? Having seen a lot of children through adolescence, what do I picture here? I picture this is probably going to work out just fine, and we've got a break in the action, or we're hanging around with some people who are spending a lot of time on video games or social media, or we're in the middle of a pandemic and your 13-year-old only knows how to connect right now through technology, and maybe that's a really clever way to connect, right? So to trust the process, I think, is really important, and to trust your parenting. This is one thing I think we forget to do, is recognize that if you are, this is what, a Wednesday afternoon? In the middle of a Wednesday afternoon, if you are one of the people who has decided to log on to a parenting Zoom session, my hunch is we are preaching to the choir and that you are pretty good at this. So if you can trust that, I think on the whole, we're doing a good job here. And I might want to sit her down and say, you know, like, I'd like you to get some exercise or learn an instrument or do something different this summer, but not with the urgency or the panic of, if you don't, you know, you're never going to make it into the college of your choice. And then what does your future look like? Which I've heard in my office far too often. But if it's just like, I think you're going to get bored here, and, you know, let's see if we can add something to the repertoire. But I totally understand why you're doing what you're doing, or help me understand why you're spending your time the way you are. Because oftentimes I will find that, you know, like parents will bring a child in who's playing video games for hours and hours a day. And when I ask that child, you know, so what's with the video games? Oftentimes it's like, oh, the video games are secondary. I'm talking to my friends most of the time, and we just happen to be wearing headsets. You know what I mean? Like we might play the game, but mostly we're driving around Los Angeles in Grand Theft Auto, you know? So you don't necessarily know what your kids are up to, because I think all of us would agree when it comes to technology, no matter how old your children are, they know more than you do, and they're 10 steps ahead of you. So it might be worth a conversation at some point. And I'll throw out one other thought that crosses my mind. I often, and this is completely unfair, and I will admit that at the outset, I will often tap an older sibling to motivate a younger sibling to get out and do things, you know? So I don't know if you've been there or done that yet, but that often carries more weight than mom or dad coming in and saying, hey, what are you doing on the couch? Let's get up and go. That, you know, I have a brother who's 8 years older, and if he said, John, let's go hit golf balls, I would have been up in a heartbeat. If my mom or dad said it, I would have been dragging my feet, you know? So use the tools at your disposal. One of them is your older child.
Yep, that's the one way I actually got him to climb a mountain this summer, because he doesn't enjoy that. I just want to echo, I love the trust the process. And I think that is something that we forget. When I had an infant group of moms, I sort of started the mantra of, you know, parenting is too big of a job for all of us to get it right all the time. And then I sort of changed that into being a human is too big of a job, and, you know, that kind of thing. And so just having the trust that you are doing some of the things right, you know, and focusing on those aspects. So thank you. I love that, trust the process.
I'm just going to hop in as a childless person here, but someone whose biological clock never went off. But I want to say that I am really enjoying this. I do, in another part of my life, have an opportunity to mentor people who have children, and I'm often at a complete loss as to what to say, and so I will refer them to other people who have children. But now I have two really good books and that I can give to them, and I can also say, hey, go follow those people on social media. They know what they're doing. So so just thank you. I really appreciate the just the idea of trusting the process, trusting that some part of you does know what to do, because that's what I see in these people, even though I have no idea what I'm supposed to be saying to them, but they really do know. There's part of them that does. I mean, people make mistakes, but so it's really, I just wanted to give a little shout out that I'm just loving what I'm hearing here. So thank you very much for what you're doing here.
Sharon,
Well, and I had something to add to the discussion. So I was working with a girl, I'm a hypnotherapist, and her mom complained that she just was watching TV and hanging out on the computer. And what I was encouraging, I was working with both the mom and the kid, was to have those discussions. And so I loved, it's like to trust yourself, trust the process. And I said, well, why don't you talk to her? How can we make your time more fun? What are some ideas that you have? And with that dialogue, they started to have one-on-ones together. She ended up getting some art material for her daughter. And then they started to have more family events too. So to not be afraid, I think it's like, hey, you know, how can we make this more interesting and fun for you? So then they feel like you're their advocate and you're on their side. Anyway.
thank you, Sharon.
Enjoying.
Michelle.
Yeah, I was going to say, I really appreciate that observation as well. And Becky, in response to your really difficult question, one of the things that struck me was part of the reason that seems particularly hard, that sense of sometimes seeing a child and thinking, wow, they're not as motivated as I would want them to be, is that especially during this pandemic, I'm feeling that for myself as well. And so there's part of it that, and so I'm feeling like I'm needing to have those conversations with myself and then I see it in them. But that realization kind of made me think, oh, maybe this is a moment where we need to be in that for a little bit, and it's okay to be in that. And you know, I have sometimes actually said to my daughters when they've been in bed until 3 o'clock, you know, I'm actually feeling like it's really hard to get out of bed myself. Maybe, but I need someone to kind of motivate me to do that. Can you come out and go for a bike ride with me? For me, and that sometimes helps. But the other thing that I found is sometimes just sitting with them in that space that makes us uncomfortable because it feels like unmotivated space, and engaging in whatever it is that they're doing for example, playing a video game with them, like nudging your way into the video game, or they're on social media, Instagram forever, nudging your way into that. I have had some of the sort of best conversations, many short moments of conversations that I've learned things like, how is it that they actually use video games to connect with other people? What are some things about Instagram that I should be concerned about and not concerned about? Like, how does it work? And so sort of living with them in their, whatever it is that they're needing right now, has actually been some moments of opportunity for interesting conversations for me to learn. And so I will share that. And, but I think my mantra, John, is trusting the process is my new mantra for both parenting and life in general. So thank you. I think that's something we all needed to hear. I will take that with me for sure.
I love what you said about, you know, hey, I'm having trouble too. Can you help me? Because I think that I've done that a lot, you know, as my son has grown up, both because honestly I do, right? But also that it's a way to empower him. You know, I can remember when he was taking piano lessons and I said, gosh, I never learned an instrument. I've always wished that I could, you know, could you show me a few things? Or, you know, when he was playing Pokemon back in the day, you know, I would say, gosh, I'm stuck in the office all day. Can you show me, can we just go out and play, you know, show me how you play Pokemon? And it's such a beautiful thing to have them be the leader or the teacher or the guide.
Yeah, and I think your children are really actually pretty good teachers. They like being teachers. They'll walk you through their technology. So, you know, you want to give them that opportunity. And sometimes it's the only way you're going to learn effectively because, again, there are so many steps ahead of us and there's so much to learn. The other concept I feel inclined to throw in here, because somebody was talking a moment ago about, like, yeah, I think Michelle, you were saying, like, sometimes I need that help too. And as parents, I think we're reticent sometimes to ask for help, that it suggests some kind of flaw, right? But I always picture, like, you know, I know nothing about cars. So if my car died, I would absolutely need help. If anybody listening is having difficulty in parenting in any way, my strong inclination is to ask for help. This is really, really tricky stuff. And there are some of the things we're talking about here. You know, there are elegant ways to manage some of the difficulties of parenting, but they don't always cross our minds when we're in that moment of perceived crisis or this intense situation. And if we can kind of step out of that and enjoying somebody who is either an expert or, to Michelle's point, you know, my partner in parenting, right? You know, to turn to that person and say, you know, like, okay, I tried with him or her, and, you know, we either should try as a team, or maybe you give it a shot because right now you're a little bit more in than I am. So, but that idea of, like, you know, co-parenting as opposed to making that, you know, this delineation of duty that goes just to one parent, which I think I suspect is a cornerstone of your work, Michelle, that would suggest that, like, those days are gone and might not have been the best idea to begin with.
Yeah, and I would just, to build on that really important point, John, I think reaching out to just other parents, even who are as inexpert as we are, I would add that. And I think this is in some ways particularly important sometimes for dads who I think have been in some ways socialized not to necessarily reach out and talk about, here's the joys and the struggles that I'm having with parenting. And so to find ways to involve, you know, have men talking to men, dads talking to dads, in the same way that I think sometimes we've been socialized to have it a little bit easier for us to do that, moms talking to moms, is really important. It's actually one of the reasons I wrote my book was primarily to try to share stories from dads for dads, right? Because you can learn so much just hearing someone else's story. But sometimes we don't ask. So, and so, yeah, I very much appreciate that, John, and would say, yeah, reaching out, we need it too. just as much as our kids need those connections and reach outs, we do too.
And I love your idea that dads can turn to other dads for help and for discussing it, and that parenting can be a verb for dads as well. I think your work is so of the moment. I've been speaking to parent groups for about 12 years, and only recently have I noticed, about 4 or 5 years ago, I would ask the very few dads in the audience to stand so that people would applaud them for showing up. Now there's actually some fraction of the audience that is dads. So I feel like more and more dads are interested in parenting and don't want to miss these crucial years, don't want to miss all the good stuff, and want to make some impact on the lives of their kids. So I feel like you're here at just the right time.
Thank you.
Oh, you guys, this has been absolutely wonderful. I see that we just have a few minutes left, and there's been so many amazing things. Oh, yes, Brenda.
Well, I just had a question. I don't want to derail us into politics, but something that scared me when I heard it yesterday, and I would imagine it would scare parents and kids. And so I just wondered, what is the best way to like think about this or hold it in our minds? That like there's pressure for school openings this fall no matter what, like just the schools are going to open, and I felt scared. And I'm not even a parent, but you know, many of my friends are, and I have friends that are teachers, and I just thought, I don't know what to do with this. So really I'm just asking, what do I do with that?
Yeah, I'll get us started here, Michelle, and feel free. I heard the same thing, and I had the same reaction, Brenda. Like, wow, this is going to be a really, really difficult call for parents, and it made me, I'll be honest, really glad that my son had already been through the school system, that I wasn't going to have to make this call. But I've already worked with families today who are incredibly anxious about this. Their kids are anxious about going back. Mom and dad are anxious about, like, well, how safe is this really? You know, this press, I totally understand. I get that it's important that our kids be with their, socialized with their peers, and that they are with the faculty and learning and progressing through the school years. Yet, to what degree are we compromising their physical safety? I had a great discussion with a mom this morning, and what we kind of decided was, okay, this is step one. So instead of looking at this like, you know, well, I guess that's the final answer and somebody else is going to decide this for me or my family, this is step one. We kind of know where the federal government is leaning pretty heavily here. Do we want to think of an alternative? Do we want to look at a different school for our kids? Do we want to homeschool for a semester or take a gap? And some people are talking sincerely about doing that. So what I think this opens the door for some families to do, and again, in my lifetime, this has never been a discussion before. There's always been just these absolutes. In the fall, you go back to school. This is the first time ever where, well, is that an absolute? Or do we have options? And as families, I like to think we always have options, and we can talk to our kids about this and they'll weigh in and have some really interesting thoughts. But my bias is, okay, this is not just a final answer. Let's look at this as space for a discussion between ourselves as parents, with other parents, and sometimes with our kids as well, to decide, well, what really makes sense here? What's the next right thing to do?
Yeah. Oh, Brenda, this is such a difficult one. And I will say for me, there's one additional layer of challenge to this, you know, like what's the right answer here? And that's that the lack of open schools, childcare generally, has fallen disproportionately in negative ways on moms. And although, and we just, all the reports are that women are faring in general, sort of overall as a group, worse because of the acute work-family struggles that the lack of school, lack of childcare, lack of summer camps has created. And I like to think of the opportunity for that, which is in terms of thinking about, you know, co-parenting and so forth, but there's an underlying reality, which is that without schools, right, without childcare, without kids, many moms, particularly single moms, right, are finding the already intensely difficult juggle between work and family to be insurmountable. And so that layer on top of it makes this really, really difficult, you know, additionally difficult, right? Because we're thinking about, wow, there's this, we really need this access for kids to have this in order to have women be able to remain in the workforce at some level for some people. That being said, right, safety comes above everything, right, in some ways. And so, John, I love that you're saying really this could be an opportunity for conversation and choices and thinking about what options do we have in our individual situation, what options do we have as communities, right? And how, as members of communities, might we shape this conversation, right? This might be a great time for us to actually reach out to our school board, to the head of our individual schools, right? And provide input, which we might never have done before. I certainly don't typically do that. And although, as Brenda, you said, you don't want to get political, totally agree with that. It's also a good time to think about these issues in terms of the voting and elections, particularly in our local level, because these things matter. So I'll just throw that out. But ooh, it's a tough one. Yeah.
I love, Brenda, what you wrote. You know, this is a fantastic article or podcast. You know, I was just fantasizing about having Michelle and John and maybe, you know, 4 or 5 other experts in this area, just talking about this, right? Like, people that we trust and who are coming at it like you guys are with innovative ideas. And I like what Nita said, which was time to teach the kids how to write their politicians. We could obviously keep going for a really long time. There's just so much good stuff here, but it is the top of the hour and we have to go. But thank you so much, Michelle and John, and to Brenda and Debbie with Mango Publishing, and to our guests who are here. What a fantastic hour this was. And I will have the replay. I think this is definitely going to be one that we should pass around as much as we can. So much great wisdom in this. So I'll get that out as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon.
So much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, John. Thank you, Sharon. Thanks to everyone.
Great. We're here every Wednesday, so come back for more conversation. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah.